And I was called next day and I got a very ambiguous phone call from my recruiter. The exact opposite of what I expected to happen. No single interview rejection has ever been as painful as that one. So back at the beginning of the pandemic, when I was first studying for interviews, I successfully got 2 offers from companies that I really wanted to work at. But they were both pulled away from underneath me at the last possible second. And given the time, the state of the world, how long I had been preparing, it was heartbreaking. To work so hard to study for interviews, to make it all the way to the end, multiple times, just to have it all disappear. But why am I talking about this? It's because if I could go back in time and magically change something, I wouldn't change anything. The interview process has its highs and its lows. And when you're sitting at a low point, it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But if you just trust the process, given enough time, everything will work out the way it should. So at first, I interviewed for a company that centers around a large piece of technology that everyone uses. And I interviewed in about March of 2020. And the day after, I was called and told that I got the offer. I was so excited. I was excited about the team I was working for. I was excited about finally being able to break into Silicon Valley tech. So with all of this, come Monday, I sit there eagerly awaiting my interview call scheduled for 2 p.m., ready to accept the offer. And instead, the exact opposite of what I expected to happen happened. The recruiter tells me that due to COVID, the company had instituted hiring freezes across all teams, and that the position on the team that I had interviewed for was no longer open, meaning they could no longer hire me. And after that, I was just in denial. I had heard there were a lot of people experiencing the same thing I had experienced, but I just didn't think it would happen to me also. But I knew that I had to trust in the process and that interviewing was a numbers game. And a couple weeks later, I got a call from a company in San Francisco, and the interview process was tough, but I came out of it with a pretty solid performance overall. And I was called next day and I got a very ambiguous phone call from my recruiter. I was told that I was very close to getting the offer, but maybe like 1 or 2 interviews had dropped me down a little. So they told me they were going to give me a take-home assignment over the weekend and see if I was ready for the offer. So of course I spent the whole weekend doing this side project, and I submitted it on Monday. And then the recruiter contacts me back saying, your code was excellent. We're ready to move forward with the offer. Finally. But then 3 days go by and they say, actually, we need 3 references first. So I'm like, okay, let me gather my references and send them off again. The recruiter called back and said, your references are perfect. We're ready to move forward with the offer. And they put me in contact with a team I was supposed to join. I met my future boss. They told me what I would be doing. And then radio silence. And a week later, the recruiter gets back to me and tells me due to COVID and all of the top talent being laid off from top companies at the moment, the market was flooded with top tier engineers. And due to that, they were raising their hiring standards, meaning they could no longer hire me. No single interview rejection has ever been as painful as that one. So sometimes I think about what would have actually happened if I was accepted into one of these 2 companies. During the time of these interviews, no one thought that the pandemic was going to last as long as it did. So if I had accepted one of these jobs, I would have had to move to NorCal ASAP with the expectation that I would start work 5 days a week in the office within maybe a month or 2. I pay ridiculous NorCal rents to live in an apartment on my own with literally no connections, no friends, and nothing to do because everything and anything was shut down. And I start my job onboarding in my apartment by myself with no physical human contact. And it would have been an absolute disaster. And that was my future. The reason I pushed so hard to get NorCal jobs was to be able to network there, to work at great companies, to work in great offices, and to meet awesome coworkers. But literally all of that was completely cut off by the pandemic itself. But so what actually happened in the end? And was my life better because of it? Well, I spent a couple weeks trying to get my life back on track after those 2 job offers were pulled and those subsequent interview failures. But I went right back into the studying process. And eventually one day I get a call from the one and only job I applied to in San Diego. I interview and I ace it and I get my offer. And because the office was in commuting distance from my house, I didn't have to move. And most importantly, this meant I could stay in the exact same place with the cheap rent I had and stay at the house that I had been living with friends for the past couple years. And being able to start a new job and quarantine with my housemates was something that I am still grateful for to this day. Every experience you can have, you can either let it weigh you down or you can take it as a learning experience. In the moment, it was hard, but in the long run, it was one of the better outcomes I could have had at that time.